Welcome, everyone. We're gathered here today to celebrate the union of Kate and Mark. The officiant's voice rang out, crisp and warm. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and I was dressed in an elegant white gown that I'd always envisioned for my wedding day. Mark stood beside me, dapper in his tuxedo. All our friends and family were in attendance. Every detail was perfect, from the floral arrangements to the gentle hum of the string quartet playing in the background. Well, nearly every detail. Enter Margaret. Imagine a woman who carries herself as if she has a crown on her head, but talks like her words are the law of the land, dressed in an outfit that somehow managed to be both extravagant and woefully outdated. She was a physical embodiment of the term matriarch, the mother of the groom, Mark's mother, and my soon-to-be hell on earth. As we moved on to the reception, she cornered me near the dessert table. "Kate, darling," she began, her voice dripping with fox sweetness, "I must say, your wedding is quaint." "Thank you, Margaret," I replied, putting on my best fake smile. "We're quite happy with how everything turned out." "Of course you are," she snickered, then leaned in as if about to share a secret. "But let's be honest, dear. Your dress, though charming, does seem like something straight out of a discount rack." My cheeks flushed. I had spent months searching for that gown. It wasn't from any discount rack. It was the dress of my dreams. Before I could muster up a response, Mark joined us. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Your mother was just sharing her thoughts on my dress," I said, forcing myself to maintain my composure. Mom's always had a strong opinion on fashion." Mark chuckled. "You know how she is." "Yeah," I agreed, but my voice betrayed me, revealing a twinge of disappointment and surprise. "I do." The evening continued, and so did Margaret's little stabs. My family didn't escape her criticism either. "Your parents are so down to earth," she observed, a loaded pause hanging between her words. "I'm sure they did their best raising you, given their means." By the time we were ready for our first dance, I had mentally prepared myself to ignore Margaret's barbs. I danced with Mark, my new husband, and tried to focus on the love I knew we shared. "Mom's just being herself, you know," Mark said, his words a quiet echo in my ear over the soft melody of our song. The phrase jarred me. Here we were, dancing as husband and wife, and yet it felt like I was dancing alone, caught in a spotlight of neglect and looming conflicts. If this was how Mark reacted to his mother's blatant disrespect, what else would he stand by and let happen? That thought, clear and unnerving, kept echoing in my mind as we spun around the dance floor. I shook it off, thinking maybe, just maybe, things would get better. Perhaps Margaret was merely caught up in the emotion of the day. Maybe Mark would find the backbone to stand up for me once the euphoria of the wedding had settled. But deep down, a small voice whispered, cautioning me that this was only the beginning of a not so fairy tale life. I pushed the thought away as we cut the cake, smiled for photos, and waved goodbye to our guests. We were married now, and I wanted to believe that we could weather any storm together. If only I knew then what I know now. Mark and I had been married for about 6 months when the veneer of marital bliss started to crack in earnest. We lived in my house, a beautiful sprawling home that I had bought with my own money from years of hard work at a top-tier company. It had a modern kitchen, a lovely garden, and more than enough space for a family. Mark also worked, but his job at a small, struggling company brought in little income. It was no secret that I was the primary breadwinner, but that never bothered me. What did bother me was the consistent stream of ridicule and condescension that flowed from Margaret every time she crossed our threshold. Margaret had an uncanny knack for timing her visits when Mark was at work, cornering me in my own space. She'd strut in, assess the place with a disdainful glance, and sigh as though the very act of walking into our home was a burden on her soul. Kate, your home is ass. Unique as ever," she'd often say, smiling that shark-like grin of hers. "Thank you, Margaret," I'd reply, biting my tongue. "Would you like some coffee?" "Yes, why not?" she'd say, taking a seat at the kitchen island, her eyes scanning the room for more ammunition. I remember one day vividly. I'd made a pot of freshly brewed coffee and set out a plate of homemade cookies, the kind that took 2 hours to prepare. I thought naively that maybe a little sugar would sweeten her disposition. "These cookies are homemade," I offered. handing her a plate. She took one bite and smirked. "Ah, I see you still have time for hobbies. Must be nice not having a real family to care for." The dig was unmistakable. The implication that my career, which was providing the roof over our heads, somehow made me less of a woman, less of a prospective mother, hit me like a slap in the face. Before I could react, Mark walked in. He had decided to work from home that day. "Hey, how's everyone doing?" he asked, oblivious to the tension. "Your wife was just offering me some of her lovely cookies," Margaret said, putting down the half-eaten cookie as if it were evidence at a crime scene. "Ah, Mom, you know Kate's a great baker," he responded, failing to catch the sarcasm in his mother's voice. "You're too kind," I said, my voice laced with an irony I knew only I would appreciate. As the months wore on, every visit from Margaret became an emotional minefield. It wasn't just the derogatory comments about my cooking or my job or my choices in home decor. It was the way Mark stood by, offering silent consent through his inaction. I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake, marrying into a family that seemed to think so little of me. The anxiety was like a slow drip, wearing away at the foundations of my self-esteem, my marriage, and my sense of belonging in what was supposed to be my home. But each time, I'd pull myself together. I'd remind myself that I was strong, that I had built a life of substance and meaning. And so, in this not so happy home, I braced myself for the next chapter, not knowing that a breaking point was closer than I'd ever imagined. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did, in a big, life-altering way. I was settling in for a quiet evening after a grueling day at work when Mark came through the door, visibly agitated. Behind him walked Margaret, carrying suitcases that looked as heavy as the burdens she'd been placing on my life. "Kate, we need to talk," Mark began, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. "Look serious." "What's going on?" I asked, already sensing that this was about more than just an impromptu visit. "Mom's lease is up, and she doesn't have the money to renew it. She's going to need to stay with us for a while." My heart sank. The idea of enduring Margaret's insults on an occasional basis was one thing. Living under the same roof felt like a prison sentence. "I don't think that's a good idea, Mark," I stated plainly, trying to keep my voice steady despite the surge of emotions. Margaret jumped in before Mark could respond. "Well, darling, it's not like I want to impose, but family is family. You do understand what that means, don't you?" The words were a slap in the face, a challenge, and a manipulation tactic all rolled into one. "I understand the concept of family just fine, Margaret. I also understand the concept of a home, a place where everyone should feel comfortable and respected," I shot back. Mark intervened. "Kate, I know this is sudden and inconvenient, but we have to help her. It's temporary. We can set some ground rules to make sure everyone gets along." "Ground rules? Like what, Mark? Will she agree to treat me with basic decency? Can that be a rule?" My voice trembled with both anger and vulnerability. "Of course," Margaret chimed in, her voice dripping with faux sincerity. "I'd be more than willing to help around the house, maybe even teach you a thing or two about running a proper home." I was livid, but as I looked at Mark, pleading with him through my eyes to take my side just this once, I realized it was futile. He was not going to stand up to his mother. Not today, probably not ever. "Fine," I relented. "She can stay, but I want it understood that this is my home and I will not be disrespected in it." "Of course, darling," Margaret said, a victorious glint in her eyes. "I wouldn't dream of it." With that, Margaret moved in, and the house seemed to shrink as though it too was bracing for the storm ahead. What was once my sanctuary now felt like a war zone. Every room became a battlefield, every interaction a skirmish. And though I was already emotionally bruised and battered, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had only just begun. In that moment, staring at the suitcases that held Margaret's belongings and the man who had allowed this intrusion, I felt a strange mix of dread and clarity. I knew that a line had been crossed, one that would set into motion events neither Mark nor Margaret could fathom. It was as if a veil had lifted, revealing the grim reality of my marriage and the role Margaret had assumed in it. The unspoken pact of cruelty between mother and son was now more evident than ever. Mark thought this was a temporary arrangement, a small hiccup in the early years of our marriage. Margaret thought she had won a round in whatever sick games she believed we were playing. They both thought wrong. I wasn't just going to be a spectator in my own life anymore. I had no idea how yet, but things were going to change, and when they did, there would be no turning back for any of us. Life with Margaret in the house became an exhausting gauntlet of passive, aggressive comments, undermining and unrelenting tension. Day by day, my personal space shrunk, just like my patience. Mark seemed to exist in a parallel universe, oblivious to the daily emotional abuse his mother rained down upon me. Or maybe he knew but chose not to see it. Honestly, it was hard to tell which would be worse. Margaret took it upon herself to criticize my cooking, rearrange my kitchen cabinets, and even berate the housekeeping staff, all under the guise of helping out. When I spoke to Mark about setting boundaries, he merely brushed it off. "Kate, she's old and set in her ways. Let's just try to keep the peace," he'd say, prioritizing harmony over justice, mediocrity over integrity. But the straw that broke the camel's back was yet to come. My parents, who had been planning to visit for some time, finally arrived. They were wonderful, supportive people who had always welcomed Mark into our family with open arms, oblivious to the grim details of my married life. We sat down for a family dinner, a lavish spread that I had painstakingly prepared. As we began eating, the conversation was initially light, filled with stories and laughter. That is, until Margaret decided to make her move. "My daughter keeps a lovely home," my mom complimented, trying to make polite conversation. "Oh, she tries, doesn't she?" Margaret replied, her voice as smooth as silk but as cold as ice. Mark shot me a quick look, as if silently pleading for me to keep my cool. And I might have, if not for what came next. "I've always believed that smart parenting creates smart children," my dad said, hinting at their pride in my achievements. Margaret chuckled sarcastically. "Well, intelligence is a subjective matter, isn't it? Some people may excel in academics and still lack basic common sense." That was it. That was the last straw. "Margaret," I said, placing my fork down with a clatter that echoed the seismic shift inside me, "you are a guest in my home. You will not insult my parents or demean me any longer." "Or what?" She smirked, reveling in her perceived power. "Or you'll need to find another place to live. And so will your son." Mark's eyes widened. "Kate, you can't be serious." "She's my mom. And these are my parents," I countered, "who you've allowed to be disrespected in our home. So, you have a choice. Either she goes, or I'm filing for divorce." Mark looked incredulous, then turned to his mother. "Mom, apologize." Now, Margaret looked stunned for the first time, her eyes darting between Mark and me, but her arrogance wouldn't let her yield. "I will not apologize for speaking the truth." "Well, then you've made my decision quite easy," I said, standing up. "I'll be contacting my lawyer first thing in the morning. You both should start packing." Mark and Margaret sat there, astonished, as if only now realizing the depths of their mistakes. It was as if a spell had been broken. I saw them for what they were, two people who had underestimated me for the last time. The last straw had been laid, and in its breaking, I found an unexpected strength, a line in the sand that could not be crossed again. I went to bed that night alone, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free from the illusions that had bound me, free from the stifling grip of Margaret's malice, and free from the weakness I had mistaken for love in Mark. The coming days would undoubtedly bring challenges, perhaps some that would hurt like hell, but the path was now clear, and on it, I would find my way back to a life of dignity, respect, and the love I deserved. There was no turning back now. The atmosphere in the house was thick with tension as the morning light broke through the curtains. Mark had barely slept, tossing and turning all night. I knew because I'd been up too, making plans and preparing for the battle that lay ahead. Margaret had disappeared into the guest room, and I could only imagine the words being exchanged between mother and son. I was in my home office, scrolling through emails from work and simultaneously researching divorce lawyers, when Mark finally knocked on the door. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tinged with a desperation I had never heard before. I motioned for him to sit. "Sure. What's on your mind?" "Kate, let's think this through. Divorce is a drastic step. Can't we go for counseling or something?" I thought about that. "Mark, but counseling works when both parties see a problem. You never saw the problem, even when it was standing right in front of you, insulting your wife. Look, I'm sorry, okay? My mom can be tough, but she's family. I never thought you'd take it this far. Mark, if you thought belittling your spouse was a game with no consequences, then you're sorely mistaken, I said, feeling my resolve solidify with each word. Just then, Margaret walked in, uninvited as always. Am I interrupting? Of course I am, but who cares, right? I heard the word divorce and couldn't resist. Mark glanced at his mother and then back at me, as if trying to gauge my reaction. I took a deep breath. Margaret, your stay here ends today. I'll be filing for divorce, and as the primary earner and owner of this property, I'll be keeping the house. You and Mark will need to find somewhere else to live. Margaret erupted into laughter. You can't be serious. Kick out your husband and his poor mother. What kind of monster are you? A self-respecting one. I shot back. One who will no longer be a doormat to a narcissistic mother-in-law and a spineless husband. Mark jumped in. Mom, this is serious. Kate's not bluffing. We've got to find a way to fix this. Fix this? Margaret sneered. Why? Because she holds the purse strings. Is that what this marriage is about? No, I replied, locking eyes with her. This marriage was supposed to be about love, trust, and mutual respect, none of which you know anything about. But it's clear that's not what I got. Okay, let's calm down, Mark interjected. Mom, you should apologize to Kate? And Kate, can we go for marriage counseling? No, Mark, an apology now is too little, too late, I said firmly. I'll be contacting my attorney today, and as for you, I turned to Margaret. I suggest you start packing. Both Mark and Margaret looked at each other, then at me, finally grasping the gravity of the situation. It was as if they'd both been actors in a play, only to find out the script had been rewritten without their knowledge. I didn't want it to come to this, I said softly, my voice tinged with sadness for what could have been. But you both pushed me here. For once, you'll have to deal with the consequences of your actions. And with that, I returned to my desk, leaving them to absorb the weight of my words. As I sat back down, I felt a strange mix of emotions. It was a cocktail of sadness for the love lost, relief for the bullet dodged, and a newfound empowerment. In setting myself free from the shackles of their manipulation, I had turned the tables in the most unexpected yet satisfying way. And as I dialed the number of the divorce lawyer, I knew that this was not the end, but a new beginning, a rebirth. And God, was it liberating? The divorce proceedings were neither quick nor easy, but every grueling moment made the taste of impending freedom that much sweeter. Margaret and Mark had initially resisted, resorting to manipulative tactics in a desperate attempt to sway public opinion and court sentiment. But the truth was my greatest ally, and their charade unraveled like a poorly woven tapestry. Sitting in my attorney's office one afternoon, we received a call that would become the final nail in the coffin for Mark and Margaret's hopes. It's settled then, my lawyer said, hanging up the phone. You'll keep the house and there will be no alimony. They've dropped their ridiculous countersuit as well. I felt like a massive weight had lifted off my shoulders. Thank you, Stephen. You've been incredible through this whole mess. It's my job, Kate, but I must say you've handled this with remarkable poise. On the day the divorce was finalized, I walked out of the courthouse with mixed emotions. Part of me mourned the death of a dream, the beautiful life Mark and I had planned but never realized. But a bigger part celebrated the birth of a new journey, one where I was the master of my destiny. Coming home to an empty house should have felt lonely, but instead, it felt peaceful. As I stepped inside, I looked around the space that was now entirely mine, untainted by toxic energy or haunting memories. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from my mom. How did it go, honey? Are you okay? I smiled as I replied, I'm more than okay, Mom. I'm free. Later, as I was unpacking some of the boxes I'd stored away during the legal turmoil, there was a knock at the door. It was Mark. He looked defeated, a shell of the man I had once loved. Can I come in? He asked cautiously. Why are you here, Mark? I just wanted to see if you're all right. All right. Now you care? I couldn't help but let the bitterness seep into my words. I messed up, Kate. I know I can't change the past, but I wish you all the happiness in the world. Your words mean little now, but thanks for the belated sentiment, I replied, closing the door on both Mark and that chapter of my life. As I returned to my unpacking, I found an old journal from my college days. Flipping through it, I came across a quote I'd written down during a philosophy class. Freedom is not the absence of commitments, but the ability to choose and commit myself to what is best for me. I closed the journal, my eyes welling up with tears of gratitude. I was finally free, free to make my own choices, free to live my life on my terms, and most importantly, free from the chains that had bound me for so long. I didn't just survive. I had emerged from the flames reborn, tempered like steel through fire, and though the path ahead was uncertain, for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, eager to explore the boundless possibilities that stretched out before me. So here I am, finally breathing without the crushing weight of others' expectations and manipulations. I've earned my freedom, and I'll be damned if I ever let anyone take it away from me again. And as for Mark and Margaret, last I heard, they were living in a small apartment, still entangled in their unhealthy symbiosis. I harbor no illusions that they've changed, but I harbor no grudges either. They're simply chapters in my past, lessons in a story that's still being written, a story that is now unequivocally